Good evening and welcome to the Lead Center of Kansas for the 2025 Elizabeth Dole Women in Leadership Lecture, hosted by the Robert J. Dole Institute of Politics. My name is Kenna McNally, and I have the pleasure of serving as the coordinator of the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board, the official student group of the Institute. I also serve as the marketing and the communications intern here at the Institute. I'm a third-year student studying digital marketing communications, United States public policy, and business. At KU, I'm a part of Her Campus, Women Educated KU, the University Honors Program, and KU Student Senate, where I serve as chair of the Community Affairs Council. The Dole Institute of Politics strives to promote a new era of leadership that uses politics to bring people together through opportunities that emphasize bipartisan cooperation, public service, and civic education and engagement, all of which is inspired by the leadership and service of Senators Bob and Elizabeth Dole, and the enduring civic contributions of the greatest generation. The Student Advisory Board is an integral part of this mission, providing members with experiential learning and job opportunities, access to financial assistance, and networking opportunities with our special guests. If you are a student here at KU and would like to join, please email us at dolesab@ku.edu or speak with a student worker after the program. Before we begin, there are a few reminders I'd like to take a moment to share with you. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the marked exits in the auditorium. In the event of an emergency, please walk, do not run, to the nearest marked exit. Please follow instructions of staff members and exit the building if necessary. Audio and video recording, as well as flash photography, are prohibited during tonight's program. A video of tonight's program will be available to stream on demand at our YouTube channel, where you can access a full catalog of our past programming. A loop hearing system is available to use here in the orchestra and balcony levels of the auditorium for guests with a T-coil hearing aid. Following tonight's interview, a limited number of submitted audience questions will be answered. If you have a question you would like to ask Sharon, please fill out the online question submission form, which can be accessed at doleinstitute.org. The Dole Institute aims to foster civil and respectful discussion about important and often difficult topics. Please phrase your questions with this in mind. Finally, I'd like to remind you to please silence your cell phones or place them in Do Not Disturb and refrain from talking during tonight's program. Now please join me in welcoming Sonia Zarnecki, Dole Institute Civic Engagement and Leadership Teaching Fellow.
Thank you, Kenna. Good evening, and thank you for all joining us in honoring the leadership of Sharon McMahon at the 7th Elizabeth Dole Women in Leadership Lecture. Tonight's program is presented in partnership with our friends at the Lawrence Public Library, and we are grateful to the Lead Center of Kansas for hosting us this evening. This lecture series is named in honor of former United States Senator Elizabeth Hanford Dole and recognizes her long-lasting career in public service, one of the most storied in American politics and public service. Over nearly half a century, she reached positions of leadership and broke barriers once thought impassable. She served as Commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission. She became the first woman to serve as Secretary of Transportation. She served as Secretary of Labor in the following administration, becoming the first woman to serve in a cabinet position over 2 different administrations. She served as president of the American Red Cross, becoming the first woman to do so since Clara Barton founded the organization. She became the first woman to represent her home state of North Carolina in the United States Senate. And after leaving office, she founded the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, one of the first philanthropic organizations dedicated to supporting our nation's military and veteran caregivers. This lecture series honors her commitment to public service by featuring women who, like her, break barriers, make significant contributions to their field, and reach positions of leadership. Needless to say, Sharon McMahon is joining a distinguished group of women, and we're grateful she's joined us tonight to celebrate her leadership in redefining how we communicate by turning confusion into clarity, inspiring change, and teaching others about how to take action. Now, I have two distinct honors this evening. First, while we wish she could have joined us in person to honor Sharon, we're fortunate to have a special message from Senator Elizabeth Dole that I'll read for you now. Dear friends, my thoughts and best wishes are with all those who gather here at the Leeds Center for the Dole Institute of Politics' 7th Annual Women in Leadership Lecture. I am humbled that this lecture series bears my name, and I so wish I could be with you in person tonight. As you know, the vision behind this Women in Leadership Lecture was to offer students and community members the opportunity to meet and hear from women who break barriers, make significant contributions to their fields, and reach positions of leadership. I want to offer my gratitude to Sharon McMahon for her leadership in modeling civil, respectful, and intellectually honest discourse, demonstrating the power of civic engagement and resilience today and across history, and inspiring patriotism in millions of Americans, first through her wildly popular online platforms, and then beyond into our real world. I know her message tonight will be an inspiring one indeed. And my heartfelt thanks to all of those in the audience who generously support the important work of the Dole Institute. We hope to see you again very soon. Welcome, Governors and Rock Chalk Jayhawk, Elizabeth Dole. Second, it is now my privilege to introduce our honoree this evening. Sharon McMahon is a New York Times #1 best-selling author, educator, and host of the chart-topping podcast, Here's Where It Gets Interesting. A former high school government and law teacher, she became known as America's government teacher during the 2020 election for her viral efforts to combat political misinformation. Her unique ability to break down complex topics with clarity, humor, and a steadfast commitment to facts has attracted a community of over 1.5 million followers, affectionately called the Governords. Sharon also authors The Preamble, an online newsletter that provides historical context and nonpartisan insights to help readers navigate the political landscape. Her debut book, The Small and the Mighty, highlights the unsung heroes who shaped America and has been celebrated as one of 2024's top reads by Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and Goodreads. Beyond education, Sharon leads philanthropic initiatives that have raised over $11 million to address critical needs, including medical debt relief and disaster recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dole Institute Director Audrey Coleman and the 2025 Elizabeth Dole Women in Leadership Lecture honoree, Sharon McMahon.
Thank you.
A warm Kansas welcome to you, Sharon. Oh my goodness.
What a cute audience this is.
And even Elizabeth Dole knows about the Governors.
That's
Governors,
so
we
great.
see you.
Yes.
Sharon, thank you so much for being with us here at the Dole Institute, the Leeds Center, the University of Kansas in Kansas.
Truly my pleasure.
Yeah, we're so
It
glad.
truly is. Yeah.
It's really special to host you and to recognize you as the honoree for the Elizabeth Dole Lecture.
Thank you. Is this on? Can you hear me? Hello.
All right, I have a lot of tough questions for you, Sharon.
Okay, hard hitting.
I mean, that was like a Taylor Swift quality welcome. That's like Taylor
There
Swift
are
for
not
civics.
enough sequins in the audience for that. It's not.
Sharon, imagine back to young Sharon. What inspired young Sharon? What kind of leaders did Sharon look up to when you were younger?
The That's a good question. I had a paper route when I was 12. I've had a job of some kind since I was 12 years old. I would imagine a lot of you can relate. Like if you grew up in Kansas, you had jobs when you were young, even like at least working in family business or whatever. So I got a paper route when I was 12, and I talk a little bit about this in my book too, that I was up early every morning, like crack of dawn, before dawn, walking my 3 miles in my minus 150 degree weather in northern Minnesota, American Siberia, and there was literally nothing to do on that paper route other than read the newspaper. And I had to do it like surreptitiously to make sure that the person didn't know that their paper had been pre-read. Nobody wants a pre-read newspaper delivered to their door. And I can remember going to school, after finishing my paper route, and I always had questions for my teachers about things that I had read. And frequently, I got in trouble in 5th grade, in 6th grade, for asking too many questions. Can anyone relate to this? Asking too many questions. I remember very distinctly asking one question, which was, I think a very legitimate question. Why does radiation cause cancer when radiation treats cancer? Like, that's a legitimate question for a child to ask, right? And he could have just been like, I don't know. Or he could have said the dose makes the poison, right? He could have answered that if he knew the answer, but he didn't, and I just got in trouble. So I think what I'm doing now is very informed by the child who was never like the cool kid. I was never the person who had the most boyfriends. Because when you are 6 feet tall, when you're 14 years old, that doesn't work out that well for you. And I recently was telling one of my friends that I have never been cool. And instead of doing the normal thing that women do, which is like, if you were like, oh, I don't know about this jacket, I'd be like, oh, it looks great, right? Like that would be the standard answer. What are you talking about? Your hair looks fine. My friend, instead of saying like, what are you talking about? Of course you're cool. You wrote the #1 New York Times best-selling book. You're super cool. And she's like, of course you're not cool. And I was like, that's so nice, thank you. And she said, of course you're not cool. It's because you're warm. And I was like, is warm the opposite of cool? Because I had spent my whole life thinking the opposite of cool was uncool. So, I don't know, I'm rambling. I'm just rambling up here, but all that to say, I think everything that I'm doing today, you can look back on my life and trace the breadcrumbs of, you don't know how this job at age 12 is going to inform what you're doing when you're 29, like I am. You don't know how your job in the classroom is someday going to lead you to doing this thing, or, all of the things that I've done in my life have led me to this moment. So the people that I have always looked up to have been people from history. And Bob Dole and Elizabeth Dole, although she's still alive, are two of those people. They really are. Yeah.
So did you become a teacher to kind of get back at the teachers who weren't good enough for you? What inspired you to get in the classroom, Sharon?
I had a weird moment that I can't really describe very well, but I had fully intended to become a physician and was in like a pre-med program. We were doing cadaver labs. Like I was literally cutting up dead people, which is an important part of learning anatomy. But nevertheless, it's like a hurdle to get over when you are first learning about it. And I was sitting in a class, and we had just finished doing this big test on like the different foramen in the different bones, like little holes in your bones that allow nerves and things to pass through. And I knew that I had done well on it because I just finished it really quickly because I had memorized everything on this test. And I'm sitting there quietly waiting for the rest of my group to be done. And I had this moment that can only be described as this sort of like knowing that descended upon me. Like, I don't want to say beam of light, because that's a little too, like, metaphysical, but it's perhaps the best language I can give to that, of like, this knowing descended upon me that said, you are meant to be a teacher. And I was like, absolutely I am.
Challenge accepted.
I literally walked down to the registrar's office and changed my major that day.
Wow.
And I never looked back, and never knew at that moment that I would be here today, right? Because you don't know where what lies ahead. But I can certainly look back and see the writing on the wall. I was the child who grew up 2 blocks from the library and checked out all of the books and devised curriculum for my younger siblings on things like wilderness first aid and cooking. And by the way, I was 10 when I was devising wilderness first aid curriculum. I did not have any business teaching my sisters how to apply a tourniquet. And I would get very frustrated that my younger siblings never wanted to learn the things I wanted to teach them. Is anyone here an older sibling? How many people are youngest siblings? No one cares if you're the middle sibling, I'm sorry. 0 people care about that. I'm just teasing, not really. But I remember trying to make my younger sister do tourniquet practice. Like, this was a thing we needed to practice regularly.
Just in case.
Just in case somebody's arm was cut off in the wilderness when we were 10 and 8 years old. And I remember her being like, I don't want to do tourniquet practice again. And my mom sort of intervening of like, Sharon, she doesn't want to do tourniquet practice again. So that's just one example of how I can now look back and be like, the writing was on the wall. It started with the tourniquets.
There it is. So how many years did you spend in the classroom?
12, which is weird given my very young age.
What told you that it was time to move on from the classroom?
I wanted to move back to my home state of Minnesota. And one of the challenges with doing that, I'd been teaching out in the DC area for a long time. One of the challenges with moving back to Minnesota, especially in the small town where I live, is there are just no jobs for social studies teachers there. And I knew that I had too much education and experience, which is a weird thing to say, but it is very true. If you work in education, you know that this is very real, and that schools have budget constraints. And people who have a lot of education and experience make more money than the recent grads for doing the same job. So I knew that moving back home would mean leaving the traditional classroom behind. But I did find a different classroom. And there have not been nearly enough tourniquets. That's coming later.
Like a virtual workshop or something seems to be in order. So how did you have really been a trailblazer using social media for teaching, for being a touchstone for factual information and information that people find dispassionate and calming. How did you discover this medium, and how did you get into, what was the gestation of Sharon Says So, and when did you know it was time to do that? Did you have a beam of light at that time?
Beam of light. Here's the thing about the beam of light answer is that nobody can argue with it. Right? It's a little bit like the people who are like, well, God told me. Well, how do you argue with that? No, he didn't? Okay, sure. It was, of course, the height of the pandemic. Everybody was home. Everyone's home and online all the time. My family had a much more unique situation in that my husband had just gotten. Ooh, my microphone went off. Is it back on? Yes. My husband had gotten a kidney transplant. And he went in for his yearly physical, his yearly dude physical, at the beginning of 2019, and found out he was in stage 5 renal failure. And there is, if you know anything about kidneys, you know that once your nephrons are toast, there's no turning them back on. You cannot rehabilitate them. So we went from, I'm gonna go get my cholesterol checked, to a week later being like, you need a kidney transplant. Wow. So at the beginning of the pandemic, it was a very isolating time. People who had COVID is actually quite hard on your kidneys, especially at the beginning of COVID when we did not have any treatments for it or vaccines or anything like that. People with renal failure had a 30% chance of death if they got COVID, which of course is highly communicable, right? Most people would not roll the dice on 1 in 3 odds of death. Right? If I said you have a 1 in 3 chance of dying in a car accident on the way home tonight, you would not get in the car. That was too high of an odd. So that forced our family to be tremendously isolated. And it ultimately got a kidney transplant in August of 2020, which is really the height of the pandemic when it was at its worst. And my mom donated one of her kidneys to a stranger in Wisconsin, so my husband could get a kidney from an unknown donor from Texas who had been listening to a podcast at work. He was an electrician working on a hospital project, working indoors on a hospital. And he had heard on this podcast that he was listening to about people who were what they call in the medical world Good Samaritan donors, where they donate an organ without an intended recipient. Most people who are living donors do so for a specific recipient. And he just thought to himself, I'm gonna check into that. And to make a long story short, he was 26 years old, by the way. Isn't that incredible? He was 26 years old. My husband ended up getting one of his kidneys. So at the end of September of 2020, not only is this global pandemic raging and we have 4 children, I'm also taking care of my husband who had an organ transplant, which it's a very challenging recovery because you are on 10 drugs that all interact with each other and all have to be very carefully managed, and you have to have access to lots of medical care. So, needless to say, I had watched every episode of Tiger King. I had seen all the episodes. I had seen every episode of Love is Blind that existed at the time. And there was just a small problem that I discovered on the internet of people just being confidently wrong online, you guys. Okay? Maybe you're familiar with this. There were people being confidently wrong on the internet, and they were saying things like, the Electoral College is a university you can graduate from. Which, that's not a matter of opinion, okay? That's just false. That's not this guy's better than this. That's just, I'm sorry, but you're just wrong. But when they say it with such conviction, it's a really interesting study in how it's not even what you say, it's how you say it. If you say it authoritatively enough, people will believe you. Mm-hmm. So I sort of decided in that moment that I could either argue with Chad on the internet, which has never ended well, or I could start making some little nonpartisan explainer videos. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So how did you notice your following increasing? What was that feeling like? Did you see your numbers going up? Was it just you wake up all of a sudden and you're like, there's 1 million people out there? How did this work?
The thing that was, of course the 2020 election was very fraught. It was very contentious. That people had a lot of questions about what was happening. And then, the Electoral College is something we only use every 4 years. It's easy to forget the details of how it's supposed to work, et cetera. So the fact that it was very contentious and there were people looking for answers attracted a lot of people to what I was doing. I started getting a lot of requests from local TV stations and local radio stations, like around the country, to have a guest come on to explain the situation to them, to their listeners or their viewers, who was not a political pundit, because a local TV station cannot afford to alienate half their audience, right? Like, it's not cable news. So they just needed somebody to say, here is how it works. And it turned out that I was that person. And I started getting lots of followers from appearing on local TV and radio stations around the country. And then as we crested into 2021, which was also a very contentious time in America, that was really when I saw the ball beginning to roll downhill more quickly. And I would wake up every morning and like refresh my Instagram and be like, what is happening? It felt a little bit, have you guys seen Lord of the Rings? Okay, have you seen Lord of the Rings? There's a scene in Lord of the Rings where the humans they're getting ready to fight the Battle of Helm's Deep. Okay, do you know what I'm talking about? Where the humans are in whatever, this fort, and there's a drawbridge, and the armies of Mordor are outside. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? You guys are like, no. Okay, so Lord of the Rings. Okay.
Should we act it out?
Suffice it to say, the humans are badly outnumbered. That's the idea. The humans are very badly outnumbered. On the other side of the drawbridge are way, way, way too many evil creatures that are intent on breaking down the drawbridge. And the humans inside are like, get the women and children to the caves. While they're like trying to like push against the door with their hands as though they can hold back what's happening. That is exactly how I felt. I felt like I wanted to yell, get the women and children to the caves. Fortunately, I was not defeated by the armies of Mordor, and here I am. Yes.
So, your Instagram platform has evolved into an online book club and a podcast and your Substack, the preamble. Sharon, was there a strategy here, or did you just start and then just keep going?
Does it seem like there's a strategy? No. No. Come on now. No, there's no mastermind of like, in June of 2024, I will start a newsletter. No, it has very much, like any educator, evolved to meet the needs of her students. That is the hallmark of any good teacher, right? Is that you tailor the instruction to what the needs of the student are. You meet the student where they're at. So that's the best way I can describe it, is it has evolved to meet the needs of the people who watch or read. I've been hearing from people for years that they wanted a place to read longer form content that wasn't an Instagram slide, that had somewhere to live, that wasn't disappearing in 24 hours like Instagram does, that is not blocked by school social media filters, right? Teachers tell me this all the time, like, I want to send my kids to watch some of your explainer videos, but they can't get on it inside the school. And then once they're on Instagram, are they really just only watching my videos? Sure. They wanted something that they could forward via email. Not everyone wants to be on Instagram. So all of this has just been an evolution of trying to meet the needs of people who are learning alongside me. Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about semantics. So you're an educator, but you're also an influencer, and you have followers. there's
I don't like the word
I-
influencer.
ideas in this country about teachers' roles and influencing students rather than educating their students. Do you think that the social media environment has kind of conflated some different purpose and intent?
That's a good question. We think of anybody who's teaching something online. Like today, we're making sourdough. You know, like you go on Instagram and you're watching somebody, or you TikTok, you're watching somebody be like, come along with me while I get IVF. You know what I'm talking about? There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying, like, these are real videos that people are watching. So it's an interesting question of, do people think that classroom teachers are the same as like Instagram influencers? And I can tell you the answer is no. Having worked spent years doing both of these things. First of all, the idea that teachers are out here indoctrinating their students with things is a little silly to me, because let me tell you what the number one message high schoolers hear every day is. Put away your phone. Put away your phone. If children could be indoctrinated by their teachers, this would be disgusting. Right? This is disgusting. They would do their homework. They would not hit one another. They would sit quietly in the chair and pay attention and engage and interact, participate in the discussion. They would do the work assigned. That's exactly what children would be indoctrinated with if this alleged indoctrination actually worked. So, no, I can tell you that being an influencer, which usually connotes being sold something, right? An Instagram influencer is usually somebody who's like, I have a code, I have here's a sale, and there's nothing wrong with doing those things, but it's not the same as what I do, and it's certainly not the same as what a classroom teacher does. There's no sales in second grade. Okay? It's a really great sale at Target this weekend, you guys.
So you having built this tremendous audience online, I can only imagine that a publisher of traditional media might have just thrown up their hands and squealed with joy when someone like you with an established audience might show up with a book proposal. Is that what happened?
Well, I mean, there certainly were publishers approaching me. There certainly were. And I took a lot of meetings, and I met with a lot of agents, and I was trying to figure out, the right book to write and the right team to work with. And of course, I'm very happy with where I landed. But the book that my publisher signed me to write is not the book that I wrote. And we've had multiple meetings about this, how they just internally were like, well, she's gonna work something out. Just gonna have to cross her fingers and trust that she knows what she's doing. Which perhaps was a bit too generous of them, I don't know. So yes, there were multiple publishers who were interested in publishing a book written by me, although I never wrote a book proposal for this book. The book that I had thought that I would write is not what you saw on the New York Times bestseller list.
So how did the concept for The Small and the Mighty come about? How did you evolve into that idea?
I kept coming back to, what do I want to read? What is the book that I would want to read? What is the book that I think people need? And in many ways, this book is very much a love letter to the reader. And I hope that when you read it and you close the last page, you get that sense that I wrote this because there are things in here I want you to know. And there are stories in here that I hope you carry with you. And it evolved by just writing sort of one of these stories, and then adding another one on top of it and sending it to my editor and being like, what do you think about this? And she was like, I loved it. I was on the edge of my seat. I loved how it ended. You know, like if you have more of these, I will take them. So that's just, it just kind of grew organically, with like asking myself, what do I want to read? What does the world need at this moment? And of course, a book like this is years in the making, right? Like traditional publishing is glacially slow. Even just from the time that you finish the manuscript to the time it lands in stores, it's like a year. You know, like especially when you work in social media, where I could be like, smile for Instagram, and then like put up a picture later, you know, in 30 seconds. It moves so slowly. So there is always a gamble, right? That by the time the publication date rolls around, that you are hoping that the book will still resonate, that it will still land, that it will still mean something to somebody. And this was originally supposed to be published in March of 2024. And my publishers came back to me and said, we want to publish it in September, which was a very scary proposition, because September of an election year is like the Oscars of publishing. Like all of the big books come out in September of an election year. Like all of the Hillary Clintons and the Ina Gartens and like all of the other people who are writing nonfiction books, they are all published at the same time. So in some ways I was very much like, but March will be better. And they, you know, after doing their sort of internal market analysis, they wanted to position it in a certain way in the market, and they obviously went with September. So that made it even like a little bit scarier, but even more pressure, because to even get noticed in a very crowded field at the end of an election year is an endeavor. So I am, in some ways, it seems like, well, some people have told me that this book came at just the right time. And I hope that's true for a couple of people, that it came at just the right time, even though it was many years in the making.
How many of you in the audience have read Sharon's book, The Small and the Mighty? Yeah? Well,
Thank you. Thanks for reading it. Appreciate it.
so if my next question leads in, 12 unsung Americans, their stories and how they built our great nation in one way or another. Which was the first story that you put together for this book?
There were people that I sort of noodled around with for a while and had never really fully fleshed out and almost cut from the book until I, stumbled across some more source material. But one of the first stories was the first story that is in the book. Her name is a woman whose name is Clara Brown, who actually has ties to Kansas. And her story I came across when I was researching women in Colorado history, people who had been pioneers of Colorado, and I was interested in, mining in Colorado. Do you guys ever go down rabbit holes where you're like, one thing leads to another? You guys relate to this? The internet makes it so easy to do this, where you're like, oh, you know what? Silver mining, that's weird. Oh, okay. I can still trace the rabbit holes. You know how I found Clara Brown is the movie The Unsinkable Molly Brown. Have you guys seen that movie? Unsinkable Molly Brown. Molly Brown's a real woman from history who becomes rich, strikes it rich in Colorado. There's even, if you've seen the movie, there's a song, Colorado, My Home, Sweet Home, right? So she gets rich from the mines of Colorado, and I became curious about, where were the mining claims in Colorado? And that one thing led to another. And now I had, just this week, an organization who is writing curriculum, U.S. history curriculum, out on the East Coast, reach out to me asking if they can use my source material in this book about Bleeding Kansas in their curriculum.
Wow.
So I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm happy about that. I feel like my fifth grade teacher can bite me. That's what I think.
I don't want you to, for those who haven't read the book, I don't want you to spoil too much of it.
I won't spoil it.
But would you please give us a hint about, I mean, because Bob Dole appears in this book, and
He
we're the
does.
Dole Institute. So can you give us a little peek into that?
Yes, I know. In fact, I even told you this. Like we've been corresponding for a couple of years before I ever ended up here, and we started our correspondence right after Bob Dole passed away at the end of 2021, and I had posted something on Instagram about his passing, and he was, lying in state in the U.S. Capitol, and this is he was a very, very consequential man in politics, obviously, as you all know. And I had mentioned to you that I am working on a book that Bob Dole will be in, so I knew that he was at least going to get like a little mention from the very beginning. And he is connected to another one of the main characters in the book. And I'll tell you a slight story here. So again, I don't want to give it away, so this is a slight divergence, but he meets during World War II, one of the characters in the book. And of course, Senator Dole was very well known for his service in World War II. And a while ago, I want to say the beginning of 2024, I was invited to a ceremony about a bridge opening that was going to be a bridge between Minnesota and Wisconsin. And Minnesota and Wisconsin have a little bit of a rivalry, kind of like Kansas and Missouri do. Okay? Some of you are from Missouri, or as my husband's relatives would say, Missouri. And so it's this big bridge project that they're going to be working on, and it's they had gotten federal money for it. It's like a $2 billion bridge because it's over a portion of Lake Superior, so it's a very involved project. And for some reason, these people thought I was a prominent Minnesotan that should be invited to the bridge ceremony. So I'm like, yeah, I'm going to that. I'm definitely going to that. All kinds of people are going to be there. So it is the entire congressional representation from both Minnesota and Wisconsin, the governors of Minnesota and Wisconsin, like city council members, state legislators, local people who are going to be, the iron workers who are going to be working on the bridge, etc. And it's also Joe Biden, right? Everybody is there. And I was sitting 2 rows behind Tim Walz. Maybe you've heard of him. And Tim Walz is sitting next to the governor of Wisconsin. His name is Tony Evers. And Tim Walz, I'm sure you've seen, this is not about his politics, it's just about his personality, has a very football coach personality, right? It's very obvious. Whereas Tony Evers very much has a I wear tweed jackets with elbow patches kind of vibe, right? They're both very nice people. But it struck me as I'm sitting literally, Tim Walz is literally 2 rows in front of me, and I'm looking at the back of his bald head. And every single person that gets up to talk, whether they are a city councilor or an iron worker, everybody's, clapping politely, like a normal, great job. Tim Walz, no. Every single person that got up to talk, he was like, let's go, Tina! You got this! Woo! Yes, right, Tina! And I was like, this is the sitting governor of a state. He could clap a normal number of times, and everyone would think that was fine. By the way, Tina is a 72-year-old United States Senator. Okay? No one has yelled, let's go, Tina. Maybe 50 years? I don't know. But he was out of his seat. You got this, Roger! The only one standing. Everyone else is like, Roger, the city councilor. Do you know what I'm saying? So later, I'm in a photo line to get my picture taken with President Biden, and Tim Walz is right in front of me. And when you go to get your picture taken. This whole thing is, of course, extremely tightly controlled with the Secret Service, right? Like, there is no meandering about. The person who's in charge of introducing you reads your name and your title like you are the Princess of Genovia. You know, like Sharon McMahon of Genovia. And so I am like walking up. Oh, let me tell you this. First, Tim Walz is in front of me. He goes first, so I'm watching this whole interaction. Tim had just flown in on Air Force One with Joe Biden, okay? Flown in with him, they get off of the airplanes, they get into separate motorcades, and they proceed to the destination. Tim Walz walks up to Joe Biden, he's like, oh, hey, buddy, long time no see. And it was very much like such a dad moment where it was like, he was for sure the kind of dude who was like, if you saw him and said, you got your hair cut, he'd be like, no, I didn't, I got all my hairs cut. Like, that is 100% him. So the idea that he was like, hey buddy, long time no see. When I knew for sure they had just flown in together on Air Force One. So anyway, I get up, I'm shaking Joe Biden's hand, and Joe Biden happened to be good friends with the person in the book that was also friends with Bob Dole. And I mentioned this to him, that my book is coming out, and a character in the book was one of his very good friends. And he just like squeezed my hand so hard, and he, I kid you not, got tears in his eyes and said, I loved him. And so, again, it's not about the politics of it, it's about the human connection that all three of these people shared with each other. And I would imagine if I had said the same thing about Bob Dole, that Joe Biden probably would have said the same thing about him. Like they cared about each other as people, which is something that we are really sorely lacking in politics today, where even if we disagree, that you're still like a human worth my time, right? The incentive structure has changed so much that I now feel obligated, if I'm a member of Congress, to act like you are, you know, the devil incarnate if you are not a member of my party, when that is not how people from Bob Dole's generation, from John McCain's generation, that's not how people have done important things for America, right? That's not how we get important things done. And this, you know, this level of rancor, I think the American public is tired of it, right? It's exhausting to watch. Like, we would never be allowed to conduct ourselves like this at our jobs, right? Like, imagine you went into your job and you were like, this person's a blah, blah, like insult, insult, insult. You would be fired immediately. You would no longer work at that place. That's not how effective companies are run. That's not good government. That's not representing your constituents well. And it's unfortunate that this is how it is. But I do think we have the opportunity to change it. We have the opportunity to change it with who we vote for at the ballot box. We have the opportunity to change it with primary elections. Primary elections, which are often won by tiny, tiny, tiny margins. The person who represents me in the Minnesota legislature won election by 32 votes. And that is not that unusual in many of these races. So if you really want an opportunity to have a real say, because so many races in America are decided at the primary, the voting districts have been gerrymandered so that you know a person from one party or the other is going to win. It's just a matter of who wins that primary election. If you want an opportunity to have more say, showing up to vote in primaries is an important component of that, and not just on general election day.
So even before the election, America was deeply polarized. after the election, it was pretty much guaranteed that 50% of the country was going to be really happy and the other half was going to be despondent. And so regardless of the outcome, that's what we were looking at. So what can we do to start repairing that relationship?
It's a great question, and it's not going to be, it's not an easy fix. We didn't get into this situation overnight. I don't have a magic wand. Anyone who says they have a magic wand, by the way, you should run. Okay? They're not Gandalf. But I will say that the problem is not going to be fixed by the people who are working within an incentive structure that is deeply flawed. The problem is going to be fixed by all of us. And like it or not, who represents us in government is in many ways a reflection of us. And if we want better government, we have to be better people, right? We have to be better people who vote for different kinds of people and policies. We need to be better people who care about our neighbors, who are willing to have constructive conversations even when we don't agree. You know, a number of the people in this book faced incredible adversity in their lives. They had no evidence that what they were endeavoring to do would work out. They had no evidence that there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Many of these people lived in, they had lived in poverty, or they grew up enslaved, or their parents had been enslaved, or they lived in the segregated South, or they faced other tremendous adversity that most of us wouldn't, fortunately, can only read about in history books. And the important changes that nearly everyone in this book, including literal teenagers, made didn't happen because they spent all of their time screaming at strangers, right? And we're spending a large percentage of our time doing just that every day, screaming at strangers just virtually, just typing at them. If screaming at people changed their opinion, this would be a different place, right? You don't change your mind because somebody shamed you into it. If shame was an effective change, a motivator of change, nobody would be an addict. Children would put away their phones at school. We would all be eating 7 fruits and vegetables every day. So, one of the people in this book is a woman named Septima Clark, who was born in 1898. And she is born after the Civil War in the segregated South. She has a set of life circumstances that nobody would want to emulate. She gets married, has a baby, her baby dies. She has another baby, and then she discovers that her husband has a secret second life and is married to a different woman with different children. And then her husband dies, leaving her the worst thing somebody could be at the time, which was a single mom. Being a single mom today is still hard, right? It's still a tremendously difficult job. And now imagine being a single mom at a time where most professions weren't accessible to women, when there was a tremendous stigma in being a single mom. And throughout her lifetime, she faced adversity in the sense that people were always opposed to whatever she was trying to do. She wanted her children the students that she taught, she becomes a teacher, she wanted them to have equal opportunities. Instead, she's told that as a black woman, she's not allowed to teach in Charleston County or Charleston Public Schools, period. Eventually, she goes on to be on the Charleston school board. And she eventually gets fired from her job for standing up for what she believes in. And she says to herself, I'll just use the time to devote to my activism, and I'll just teach other people. And one of the people that she goes on to teach, one of the adults that she goes on to teach, was a woman named Rosa Parks. And in many ways, Septima Clark becomes, although she had no grand plan, she becomes the mother of the civil rights movement because she is showing the civil rights leaders how to do what they're doing. And at the end of her life, she lives a very long life. People ask her, what have you learned? What can you teach us? And she had a number of really beautiful pieces of wisdom. But one of the things that really stuck with me was a moment where she said, I have learned that I can work with my enemies because you never know when they might have a change of heart at any moment. And what a way to look at somebody with whom you disagree. She didn't say, oh, my neighbor and I, we agree on most things, but just not a few of these things. She said, I can work with my enemies. And throughout her lifetime, people tried to kill her. More than one time, the police found people on their way to try to firebomb her house. She feels that her life is spared over and over. She attributes it to God sparing her life. She doesn't say, I can work with most people. She says, I can work with my enemies because they might have a change of heart at any moment. And how would her enemies have a change of heart if she didn't work with them? How would they see the light if she never showed it to them? If she just deleted, blocked, unfriended everyone with whom she disagreed? Now, I'm not saying that this is a license to let other people ruin your life or bully you or to allow them to abuse you. That is not what I am saying. She didn't say, I let my enemies live at my house, right? I gave my enemies all my money. She said, I can work with my enemies. And what she was referring to was when there is an important thing to accomplish, sometimes it requires us to do things that perhaps we would not naturally be inclined to do because we are in service of something bigger than our personal feelings. And this is applicable to so many things in our lives, whether it's government, whether it's a faith community you belong to, whether it's your family, whether it's a school that you teach at, that we are in service to something larger than ourselves. And sometimes that requires the sacrifice of working with people with whom you deeply disagree. And that's how, in fact, most important things have been accomplished. Not because America has used to be way more, unified than it is now, but because we understood that the way to get something done was to agree wherever we could. Even in the Bob Dole Museum, there's a quote that is on the picture on the frame where you see his casket. And he said he actually uses a phrase that I've used many times, which is this concept of we have to put principle before party. And this applies, more broadly to putting principles of serving America, serving the Constitution, serving our communities above an allegiance to a person or a party. That there is no party or person who deserves your undying allegiance. That your highest service is not to that, it is to something greater than yourself. Those are the people that history smiles kindly upon. Those are the people that get chapters in books, that get biographies written about them. They are the doers and not the critics. They are the people who kept putting one foot in front of another despite all evidence to the contrary that what they were endeavoring to do would work out. They are people who chose to have hope even when they didn't feel like it. They realized that hope is not a feeling that you will experience one morning when the skies are blue and the birds are chirping and the stars have aligned. That it is an orientation of your spirit and a choice that you make each day. Those are the people who are the small and the mighty. And Bob Dole is a great example of that. From a small town in Kansas, he eventually becomes more mighty in power and stature than most of us will ever be, right? I'm never going to be a senator. I'm never going to be the Republican leader in the Senate. I'm never going to be a presidential nominee. But nevertheless, the principle remains that the people that history smiles kindly upon are not the people with the most cunning social media comebacks. They're not the people with the wittiest zingers. They're the people who went for broke when everyone else said to turn back.
This is a very engaged audience, and I'm betting that there is a mountain of questions that they've submitted for Sharon, and I want to get to those, but I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll turn it over to our students who are going to be reading your questions that you've submitted during our conversation. So, Sharon, help us kind of reconcile a couple things that are true, and then maybe, coach us through a path forward here. So your book, for example, is very inspiring. The stories are very inspiring of these 12 unsung everyday Americans who we might call heroes. But their stories are against a backdrop of discrimination, enslavement, bad policy, as an understatement. So how can we talk about history in a way that makes us feel proud of ourselves, at the same time acknowledging that as a nation, we've made some grave shortcomings? And how do we reconcile that? Our national identity is really wrapped up in being a good nation.
Exceptional.
Yes, American exceptionalism. So how do we move forward in an intellectually honest kind of a way?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's a great question to ponder. And I think the answer to me is very obvious. If you have a best friend, you know what their flaws are, right? You know that they are always 10 minutes late to everything. If they borrow something from you, they are never returning it, right? You know what their flaws are, and you love them anyway. It's not that your best friend is perfect or your spouse is perfect. It's that you see their flaws and you choose to love them anyway. And that is true, I think, of history, right? To have an intellectually honest conversation about where we've gone wrong better serves it better serves our descendants if we can grapple with the hard truths. You can't build real pride on a lie. And so many people tell me that they feel like they were sold a bill of goods, that all they learned about were, the same 10 people every single year. Why is it George Washington every year for 13 years? There's nothing wrong with learning about George Washington. He's an important person to learn about. But there are so many people who reach adulthood and feel like they were never told the truth. And feeling lied to actually feels much worse than knowing the truth from the beginning. Isn't that true? Just tell me the truth from the beginning. If you have kids, haven't you said that to them? Like, it's so much better if you just tell the truth and we can deal with it than if you lie to me and now we have to unravel the lie. That's far more damaging. So I don't think it is unpatriotic to be honest about where we've gone wrong. I don't think it is. I think that's just telling the truth. Any institution run by humans is going to have mistakes baked into it. That's just the nature of the beast, right? This microphone, I tell you. But it also doesn't mean that we allow ourselves to devolve into cynicism, where we think to ourselves, like, this whole thing is corrupt, light it all on fire, nothing can ever get better, it's all trash. Like, we all know somebody like that, right? We all know somebody. Some of you are like, yeah, that's me. It's all trash. But much like you would not want to be judged by your worst day, neither can America, right? Like, it's important to understand the full scope of a person's contributions. It's important to understand, Thomas Jefferson did some really incredible things. Thomas Jefferson also enslaved people. Both of those things are true at the same time. We don't have to pretend that one of them isn't true. So to me, that's what it is. It's just better to tell me the truth from the beginning than to feed me a lie, and now I am duped. I feel angry about it, and we have to unravel the lies. Let's just be honest, and that's a much better place to build on.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sharon. Mm-hmm. All right, we have some student advisory board members who are going to be presenting some of your audience questions. Hey, Austin.
Thank you, Audrey, and thank you for being here tonight. My name is Austin Christ. I'm the Outreach Student Coordinator at the Dole Institute of Politics, and I'm a senior at the University of Kansas. Tonight, I'm joined by a couple of my fellow student workers to relay some questions from the audience, starting with a question from Elizabeth from Overland Park. With misinformation being so prevalent today, what are the most effective ways educators and everyday citizens can help promote fact-based civic engagement and critical thinking?
The first thing is that, I think back to my sort of origin story of I decided that I wasn't going to waste my time arguing with Chad on the internet. That the best inoculation against the lies is the truth. If I were to, tell you all, like, the moon is made of green cheese, you guys. It's delicious. We harvest it. We regularly go there. We put it in salad dressing. None of you would believe me because you know the truth, that the moon is made of rocks, right? So no matter how hard I can try to convince you that the moon is made of green cheese, you aren't going to fall for it because you know the truth. So the best inoculation against lies is the truth. And of course, it's difficult to know all the things. Fifth grade me believed that one day I would know all the things. High school me believed I did know all the things. And the older you get, the more you realize how little you know. And that actually, I think, is a really beautiful thing about the world. I actually love that I know, 1/1,000,000th of 1% of the things there are to know. Like, that's a very exciting prospect for my brain. To be like, there's so many things to know. It's very exciting to me to think about all the things I don't know. So obviously you can't know all of the things. So absent not knowing the facts about something, understanding where facts come from is something that I think even a lot of American adults are, I'm trying to think of the right way to say it. There's a little bit of problem with that. We have now reached a juncture amongst some people on the internet where the definition of truth is, I agree with it. And the definition of lie is I don't like you. And you are thus a liar, right? Facts don't require your approval for them to be facts. And that is like a mantra that I frequently tell my children, much to their chagrin. They don't love it. Facts don't require your approval for them to be facts, meaning you don't have to approve of it for it to be true. And that's a lesson that I think a lot of people really could do better, hide it in their hearts, tuck it in their pockets. That we don't have to ask ourselves, do I agree with this for it to be true? And I think we do, in an effort to foster discussion in the classroom, we ask people frequently, do you agree with this? Tell me what your thoughts are. Well, what do you think about blah, blah, blah? And I think maybe we need some more explicit instruction on which things are opinions and which things are facts. Because there's seems like a generation of adults who are struggling with this concept. Like the Electoral College is a university you can graduate from. According to this guy on the internet, it also was located near the White House. He had this entire fictitious thing happening in his mind that he just invented. The other thing that I would say, in addition to explicit instruction on distinguishing, what's the difference between an opinion and facts, is when you have an opinion, how to, that explicit instruction on how to disagree with people. It's a question that I get asked literally everywhere I go. Adults do not know how to disagree with people. And so consequently, if we as adults don't know how to disagree with people, what hope do we have of teaching our children how to disagree with people? So that's something that concerns me, is the number of adults who don't know how to disagree with people. And that, to me, I'm sure most people in this audience do know how to disagree with people without it devolving into dehumanization. But that's really a lesson that we need to not just be hoping that our children pick up on, but that we need to be explicitly instructing them on. Because we now are reaping the fruits of having not done that.
All right, next question.
Hello, my name is Nathan Binstock. I am the Pizza and Politics Coordinator at the Dole Institute of Politics, and I am a second year here at KU. My question for you, Sharon, is from Mariah, who's from Manhattan, Kansas. What should a person who is worried about the current overreach of the executive branch into powers that are not theirs and the actions that Elon Musk is taking be doing?
It seems like some people share the same concern. Yeah, what a unique situation. What a unique situation. I was having a conversation with somebody last night, and I said, imagine a scenario in which Hillary Clinton's friends took over the Treasury. Hello. Imagine a scenario in which Hillary Clinton's friends took over the Treasury. That seems absurd, right? Would anybody be okay with that? No, 0 people would be okay with that. The same exact principle applies. Nobody's friends should be taking over the Treasury, right? Doesn't matter who it is, nobody, right? Not my friends. Certainly not 6 21-year-olds. We barely trust them to buy beer, okay? Barely. Thanks to Elizabeth Dole. We made it so they could buy beer when they were 21. So in terms of what citizens can do, there's really 3 things that I would suggest. The first thing is, it is important to raise awareness of what is happening. Because again, this is about the principle of the matter that nobody should be doing these things. that we have a system of checks and balances that has served us relatively well, not perfectly, but relatively well for going on 250 years, right? The system of checks and balances, again, not perfect, but is the best we have. The same is true of just democracy in general. Democracy in general kind of sucks, but it's the best that we have, right? It sucks in the sense that a lot of people don't get what they want. Not that there's better things than democracy, because there isn't. So this is, what is happening? Hello. Wow, have you spent the entire time not being able to hear me? Jeez, you guys, yes? This audience has been sitting quietly this entire time. What is let's start over. Hello. So, Lord of the Rings, okay? Here we go. I knew this microphone was trouble. In fact, I called somebody to come help me with it. The first thing is the public needs to be aware of what's happening, right? We cannot have public outcry without public awareness. That's the first thing. So if you're like, what can I do? How am I supposed to stop a billionaire with a weirdly shaped rocket ship? The answer is post about it on Instagram. Okay? So the first thing is, raising public awareness is actually an important component of this. Other people need to know what is happening. The second thing is, yes, you absolutely do need to be contacting your members of Congress. Your members of Congress need to hear from you, and that includes both your representative and both of your senators. If you do not know how to find your representative, you can go to congress.gov, and on the upper right-hand corner of congress.gov, the main homepage, you can enter your zip code, and it will tell you who represents you in the House of Representatives. So it's easier to find who your senators are if you're not sure, because they're alphabetized by state name. I would suggest calling. Emails are easier to ignore. Calls are harder to ignore. My son used to be a staffer on Capitol Hill, and I've been all over Capitol Hill, including with somebody who represents Kansas's Big First. And I asked some of his staffers, how many phone calls? I asked point blank, how many phone calls would it take for you to say, we have an emergency? Do you want to know what the answer is? 300. 300 for that staffer many of you live in this person's district. 300 people is how many would have to call in one day for there to be an emergency in that office. Right? 300, I don't know how many people are here, but it's more than 300. Right? Like, that's a number that we could come up with. Right? It's not 3 million, it's 300 people. That's how few people call their representatives. 300 people would have to call me. Should you call your representatives even if you think your representative is best friends with said billionaire? Yes. Ultimately, they answer to you, and if they want to get reelected, they need to know how their constituents feel about this. So that's the second thing I would say is, yes, you absolutely do need to be contacting your representatives. The lights are flashing.
Oh, things are getting
They're like, stop
funky.
talking about it. The third thing I would say is, I know that some people here are federal employees, right? Or you have people in your life that are federal employees. And I would say throughout history, people have been able to do inappropriate things much more easily because people give up in advance. They give up in advance. So most of you, I was talking to somebody at a reception earlier today who's like, my daughter is a psychologist at the VA who who just wants to help veterans. She doesn't view her job as political, right? She's literally serving some of the people who deserve the most help. That's a great example of somebody who should not just be like, you know what, forget it. Do not predetermine failure. The more difficult people can make it by resisting, the longer it will take for the 21-year-olds to do whatever it is that they're doing. Yeah. So resist. Yeah. These students are extremely professional. Good job, KU. Yes. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Ella Rooms, and I am the events assistant at the Dole Institute, and I'm a junior at KU. And Kathy from Kansas City, Missouri asks, what do you miss most about teaching high school?
I think this is true for like almost every teacher, like the moments where you feel like a student, you've made a huge difference in a student's life. Like those are the moments teachers live for. They're not doing it because they're getting all the zeros they deserve on the paycheck, right? And that is one of the more challenging things about this job is that I'm talking to myself alone in a room much of the day. And so you kind of lack that sort of one-on-one connection. My very first day as a teacher, I believed that I was Michelle Pfeiffer in Dangerous Minds. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. And I believed I was going to change all of these young hooligans into scholars. Most young teachers are idealistic, right? And that's good. It's better to start idealistic than start jaded, right? And I walked into the room and I was wearing a purple velvet maxi skirt from The Limited and a gray blazer. And I was really feeling myself. This is my first professional job, and I was making $26,000. And that was not my take-home pay. That was my gross pay, okay, that I had to pay taxes out of. And I walk in, very Michelle Pfeiffer-like, and I say it very nicely to everybody. You're like, hey, would you mind finding a seat? We're gonna get started. Please and thank you. No seating chart. No plans of where, and all the teachers are like, no. How could you not have a seating chart? And everybody sat down except for one boy in the back of the room who was leaning against the chalkboard. And I said very nicely to him, hey, would you mind finding a seat? We're going to get started. And he looked at me and said, I'm not going to sit down, you ugly. Fill in the blank. There are children here, or I would tell you what he said. Whatever word you're imagining is probably right. And I thought to myself, ugly? How dare you? This is a purple velvet maxi skirt. He was later shot. He did not die. But the bullet did destroy, no, it was not me. No, I did not do it. Both of the bones in his lower leg were destroyed. He was out of school for several months. And when I finally got an email from attendance being like, blah, blah, blah is coming back today, I was like, but why? He did come back, and right before the bell rang, he pulled me aside and was like, I just want to let you know I don't think you're an ugly bleep. And I was like, well, that is a huge relief. Because I have been lying awake at night every day for the last 3 months, worried that you thought I was ugly. And then he spent the rest of the semester being the classroom police officer, which if you are a teacher, you know the best scenario is for the children to police themselves, right? That is the best scenario if the children police themselves. And what he would do would, somebody would start not doing what they were supposed to be doing. He would be like, psst. He would make this noise and hold his finger up at them. And the children would listen because this boy was shot, so he knew some people. Right? He knew some people. I am not messing with that scenario. All that to say, I don't get to know any of those stories anymore. Nobody is shot and comes back to class later on the internet. They do still call me ugly, though. So there's that.
We have time for one more student question, then I've got a quick wrap up with Sharon, and we'll be on our way this evening.
Thank you. Gina from Kansas City, Missouri asks, in the pendulum of politics, do you ever see our country going back to the middle, like during the Dole era?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the pendulum will swing, but here's the thing is it can swing more slowly than you want it to. Martin Luther King said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think one of the things that's so important to remember is that it doesn't bend toward justice because that's how it's shaped. It's not naturally like a rainbow. It bends towards justice because people reach up and pull it down. Right? That's what our job is, right? It's our job to do that. People reach up and pull it down. And so if we want the pendulum to swing, we, I think, perceive, because we turn on social media, we turn on the news, and we perceive that politics is something that is happening to us, sort of against our will. And I understand where that sentiment comes from. I understand why people feel that way. And in many ways, especially if you belong to a marginalized community, it's a very real and legitimate thing to feel. But in reality, politics is something that is happening by us and for us. And if we want it to look different, then we have to be different. If we want to see change, we have to be the people who begin the change. We have to stop waiting for some dude to ride in on a white horse with a scroll that says, I have the plan. I think so many of us feel like we're just waiting for this like savior on a white horse moment. And that is anybody who rides in on a white horse with a scroll that has the plan, run. Okay? It's never a good plan. It's usually a plan to lead you off a cliff. The good news is that nobody is coming with a plan. That's the good news. And that means that we get to be the plan. We are the plan. It's not a dude on a white horse. So we have to stop looking off into the distance and feeling like somebody has to be coming to save us. That's never really been true. People didn't have civil rights bestowed upon them from on high. They took what was rightfully theirs, right? They took what belonged to them anyway. And that is true of all of us today, that we reach up and bend the arc of the universe towards justice. If we want something to be different, we must make it so.
This has been such an enjoyable evening, Sharon.
Thank you.
We're looking towards the future. Before we close, look towards the future. In 2026, Our nation is going to be marking a pretty big anniversary.
Yes.
The 250th anniversary.
I know.
of
There's
the
already like a
Declaration
whole
of Independence.
commission formed, the 250 Commission, yes.
Yeah. How would you answer this in one of two ways? What do you think we can accomplish together before July of 2026? Or how do you think we should celebrate?
There's a lot we can accomplish together. It depends on what we are willing, what we have the appetite for, of course, right? But in terms of what we celebrate, I think it's important that we celebrate not just, all of these like amazing achievements in history, all of these, like we invented electricity, like of course there's a lot of cool things that have happened. And of course we should celebrate those things. But I really feel like it is time for us to celebrate the small and the mighty. That it is, yes, it's great to celebrate George Washington, sure. Abraham Lincoln, I'm all for it. But there are a lot of women whose stories have never been told. There are a lot of people from minority groups whose stories have never been told, whose stories have either been intentionally excluded or forgotten from the narrative of history. And I think in the next 2 years, we can do a lot to tell their stories.
Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah, thank you guys. Should we take a picture together? You want to take a picture together? Okay, ready? Okay, you guys have to smile. Are you ready? We're taking a picture, okay? In case you didn't hear it, that's what we're doing. Here we go. Oh, you guys look so cute. Oh, look it. There's me up there. Wow. Wow. That's a little bit like the Target self-checkout. Oh, heck no. I refuse to use self-checkouts for that reason. I am not looking at that picture of myself. Heck no. I don't know what that is, but that is not me. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for coming on a school night. Thank you. I love you guys. You guys are so cute. Thank you. Aww. No one called me ugly. Amazing. Thank you guys.